Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody. This is Howard Fox. For my co-host, Randy Ford, I want to welcome you to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. My guest today is Dr. Ralph B. Alexander. Ralph is a science writer who puts science above political correctness. He has been a researcher at laboratories in Europe and Australia, a professor at Wayne State University in Detroit. Oh my God, there is a connection there. He is the co-founder of an entrepreneurial materials company and a market analyst in environmentally friendly materials for a small consulting firm, and the author of Science Under Attack, The Age of Unreason, which was published in 2018, and also The Global Warming False Alarm, which was published in 2012. He lives in California with his wife, Dr. Alexander. Ralph, if I may, welcome to the Success Insight podcast.
Thank you, Howard. Glad to be here.
So I was really excited when you had reached out to our queries about having authors on our podcast. And I think one of the reason for that excitement is a couple of things. As I read more about you, I saw Wayne State University, and that was my alma mater as well for my initial bachelor's degree and master's degree. So I'm wondering, when were you at Wayne State University?
It was about 30, 40 years ago, 1977 to 1984. And let me just make a plug for Wayne State University, though it's been a long time since I've been there. They are one of the top 100 research universities in the country.
Very much, and I know they will appreciate the plug. And by the way, it kind of dates me as well, so thank you for that. Because I was there late 70s, early 80s, and I specifically remember going through was it Prentice Hall? Maybe what was the physics building?
Prentice, I think.
It was Prentice. Okay, I remember going through the building, and I had a professor that always used to wear a beret in class. So enough of the history. Let's talk about the 2019-18. And so tell us a little bit more, Ralph. What have you been doing? What has your career been like? And kind of set the stage so we can talk more about your books.
Well, my books, as you know, focus on climate science, but that really is quite some distance from my career, which was in essentially nuclear physics. At least I was trained as a nuclear physicist. I didn't go into nuclear physics as such. I went into a cross-disciplinary field known as particle-solid interaction physics, which looks at as it suggests, what happens to a solid material when you bombard it with nuclear particles. I spent, at one stage, I noted that my career came in 7-year segments, so I figured I must have gotten the 7-year itch over and over again. It was 7 years in basic research. As I mentioned, I was professor at Wayne State for 7 years. Then I spent the next 7 years running this small materials company, which finally succumbed to economic forces, went under in the recession of 1991. And since that time, at least until I retired a year or two ago, I worked as a consultant in the same general area of materials. The interest I have in climate science actually came from a course I taught. Somewhere in me is the urge to explain. I guess I'm a born teacher. And after I left Wayne State, I must have missed the teaching aspect, because periodically I actually created some courses in the materials area. But in addition to that, I went back to Wayne State and taught a course in basic physics and astronomy. And one of those courses had a handbook that had with a section on climate change, which I duly taught according to the handbook. But afterwards, I started to think about it, and I began to question what the handbook said. And not knowing much about it, I decided to educate myself. I got hold of the reports of a body called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which produces very lengthy reports, thousands of pages long, every 5 or 6 years. And I read one set of those from cover to cover. And the more I read, the more skeptical I became of the conventional wisdom. And at that point, I decided to write a book.
So I'm curious, 2 questions. One is, in the book, been a little bit of time, but do you recall the passage or some key point in that book that kind of struck you? That's odd. I need to learn more about this, which then puts you on that path of learning and writing and having a point of view regarding
Yes, yeah. In particular, it was what I call the conventional wisdom on global warming. I do believe global warming is real. We can't get away from the fact the Earth is warming up. The question is, what is causing the warming? Do humans play a part? Conventional wisdom says, yes, humans play a big part. It's largely due to us. As I delved into the science behind that assertion, I began to question it. And what I question in particular is not the fact that humans make a contribution to global warming, but how big a contribution. Is it most of the warming, or is it just a small part? And are natural sources of warming just or more important?
As you then kind of leapfrog into this intergovernmental panel, I mean, thousands of pages. I can only imagine, lots of words, lots of charts, algorithms. Making sense of that, what were some of the points that further, raised questions in your mind about the conventional component of it versus the scientific basis?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. It was really the infiltration of politics into the science. The IPCC, for short, the panel has some excellent climate scientists, well-meaning, who do very good work, but their work isn't always presented as science. The panel has another aspect to it. In fact, the whole organization, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was founded on the assumption that climate change is caused by humans, and the idea of founding the panel was to do research to further look into that.
What do they find then? I mean, if the panel is set up to look at humanity's impact on it, what are they finding? And is that the type of data, however they collect it, that we can rely on? Or is it then, and I do agree with something you said, politics enters so much of our conversation today. It's whether it's polarizing or consensus, it's still politics. So what was it about the human element of that desire to study that really raised additional eyebrows for you?
Well, the problem is, and it comes through if you read enough of these reports and the more political parts of them, the starting point is the assumption that we did it, that humans are responsible. There is, among the climate science community, there are activists, I will call them, alarmists would be another term, who are bent on pushing this idea to the exclusion of contrary data and contrary thinking. And so anything that supports the status quo, that bolsters the conventional wisdom, gets funded. And funded, is in the billions of dollars annually just in the US. Anything that goes against that probably won't receive any form of support or funding. So it's very difficult, is what I'm saying, for contrary voices to make themselves heard. That's one of the reasons I wrote the first book.
Is it possible that there are contrarian viewpoints on the other side of that equation?
You mean among the believers in human-caused climate change?
Well, you've got one group that's saying humans are the cause of the climate change, and all the research that's going into it is essentially serving to bolster that argument. And then there's another argument, again, we keep politics, necessarily try to keep politics out of it, that says it isn't humanity, it's a natural, there's other data that points to other reasons. And is there still a voice on that side of the equation? That's what I'm trying to ask.
There is on the contrarian side, there are voices. There are some strong voices. There are some climate scientists, not a majority, but more than a few percent. The conventional narrative, as you probably know, is that 97% of climate scientists agree. Well, that's nonsense. The true number is unknown, but from the research that's been done, it probably about two-thirds, about 65%. That's still a majority, but that means there are a lot of climate scientists and a lot of scientists in general who are on the other side who disagree. But it's very difficult, as I said, for people, contrarians, sometimes called deniers, which is a derogatory term, skeptics, I think is a much better term, like myself, to get heard. If I were a climate scientist, it would be difficult for me to get research funding, to get promotion if I was still at the university working in that particular field, unless I kowtowed, I say, to the conventional wisdom. And in this way, groupthink dominates. The conventional narrative just gets bolstered and bolstered over and over again, even though that, as it turns out, is not based on true science. And this is the point of my books. True science is based on empirical observation, primarily, plus logic to make sense of the observations. Most of the narrative about impending doom from climate change is not based on empirical observations. It's based on computer models. Now, computer models are fine. Some computer models are superb. Models used to design airplanes work very well because we know everything that goes into the models. Other computer models don't do so well. Think of the models in the financial world, the models that are routinely used to assess risk. Well, they weren't too good 10 years ago in assessing risk before we had the great big financial crash and Great Recession. Likewise, computer models of the climate make a lot of assumptions. They're good in some areas, but overall they're not, and they're particularly bad at prediction. And yet this whole narrative that we are the bad guys, that, us humans here on the planet causing all this warming, all of that is predicated on the predictions or results of computer models, not of actual observations. The actual observations just tell us that it's warming, but they don't tell us where the warming is coming from.
I don't think that little piece gives me a lot of comfort. It's like we know there's a problem, but we don't know what's causing it, where it's coming from.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, it's unsettling. And for the vast majority of the public, they don't want to hear that. They want to hear that we can do something about it. And what do? We get rid of fossil fuels because we're putting all this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Well, I mean, that's fine if you want to change energy sources. In my opinion, and that of many other global warming skeptics, that's not going to help one iota to stop or reduce global warming. I mean, all this, talk and all this effort is going, and lots of money is going for nothing. We'd be much better off if we dealt with the problem itself, which is warming. And what can we actually do about that? What can we do to mitigate it? As I said, I don't believe cutting back on carbon dioxide is the answer, but there are other things we could do. For example, one of the biggest results, most worrisome results of global warming is sea level rise. Lots of low-lying nations around the world, the coasts of Miami and Florida, and others are threatened by rising sea levels. But those sea levels have been rising since about 1850. That's long before we had SUVs or were burning a lot of coal in power stations. That just was when the warming started.
Is that trend when the warming started? And it's interesting you're bringing some of this up. Is can we gather data that said, I don't know what it is. You're the physicist. I'm not. I'm just a psychologist.
Yeah, I think I know what you're going to ask, and the answer is, in essence, no. And that's where the computer models come in, because those are the best handle at the moment that we have on the situation. The data itself, or very little of it, comes with a signature. If some animal changes its habitat, it doesn't carry a label saying, I'm doing this because, of all the extra CO2 in the air, or even because of warming.
So the data is only as good as you can put into it, whether you have it or not. Now, it seems to me, we just had this hurricane in the Bahamas. It nearly wiped out some of the northern islands of the Bahamas. It bypassed the U.S. My feeling, and again, I am listening to media, so perhaps there's a built-in bias there, depending on what media I listen to. But my sense is there's a lot going on in the world that is beyond our control. It's hard to explain. Why are the hurricanes? Yeah, there was a Category 5 hurricane back in 1935 that I think that was the date that went across the Bahamas, the strongest one to date, which was right in the early stages of the Industrial Revolution and coal burning.
Well, that's correct. In fact, I've just written a series of blog posts on the lack of connection between climate change and extreme weather. And in hurricanes, what you were talking about was known as the Great Hurricane of 1780. That was way more powerful than what just devastated the Bahamas. It had winds exceeding 200 miles an hour and supposedly killed 27,000 people. In the Bahamas, we're looking maybe at a few hundred. So, hurricanes are terrible. They're devastating. They cause, a lot of ruin. But there is no evidence, and that's what I'm trying to emphasize, scientific evidence. There is no evidence that hurricanes today are any stronger or more frequent. In fact, they're less frequent at the moment than they have been in the past. And you can say the same about tornadoes. You can say the same about heat waves and other forms of weather extreme. Now, if you just believe what you read in the newspapers and on television, no, you get a totally different picture because it's very biased. The media, the mainstream media, unfortunately supports the global warming, what I call the global warming narrative, that all that's happening around us, including climate extremes, weather, comes from humanity, comes from what we call climate change.
Well, it's interesting, and what I'd love to do is dive more into the book Science Under Attack. Something that's still going through my head is part of the, we've constructed this narrative, we're bombarded with it, and the conversation is just to understand, create awareness, listen to understand. And my sense still is, even if we could understand it, we are still not, as humanity, good stewards of our planet.
Right. Well, I touched on that one before when I didn't finish when I was talking about sea levels. What we can do in that area is take lessons from the Dutch. Most of the Netherlands, and most people don't know this, most of the Netherlands is below sea level.
Right.
And yet the country is not awash in water. Why is that? Because the Dutch have learned a thing or two over the last few hundred years in building seawalls and dikes and taking other measures to keep their country dry. Well, that's the sort of thing we should be paying attention to, especially people living in coastal communities and in low-lying countries like Bangladesh. Same with heat. If it's getting warmer and it's going to get warmer still, it looks like, then what do? Well, one of the things we could do is change our building codes to adapt. In other words, we need to put a lot more emphasis on adaptation than we are putting into other forms of what we think are remedies.
Here in Chicago, since I have been here, there's had been a huge emphasis, and maybe it was not, we just have a new mayor now. Then we had another mayor 8 years before that was the young Mayor Daley, and there was a big emphasis at that point about putting grass up on the roofs to minimize the heat from the tar roof.
Yes. Well, there's a good measure. I believe in Los Angeles, they're contemplating painting the streets white for the same reason. I mean, that there are things we can do to mitigate the effects of a warming world.
So as I hear you, it seems to me we still need to pursue gathering evidence, gathering data.
Oh, definitely.
And bringing, I would say, individuals of a variety of opinions, thoughts. They look at things through a different lens, because I think we can't really set out to solve a problem or issues unless we can have for the better sake of a better word, Doctor, is just an adult conversation. We have to have a conversation to understand, and even if it's a variety of viewpoints, to come up with potential solutions to these the problems. Because I think we should do. I mean, I would suspect in your book, Science Under Attack: The Age of Unreason, is that you probably lay out perhaps some guidelines, some thoughts on what humanity can do to,
Actually, I don't. In neither book do I actually address that. I focus on the science, and in Science Under Attack, my approach was to look at different areas, including things like evolution, dietary fat, vaccination, and see what is the actual science and what is the science? What has the science become because of the intrusion of politics, because of fear mongering, because of tribalism, groupthink, all these human characteristics that distort the underlying science. And my message in the book basically is that in global warming in particular, which is only one chapter out of 6, science has come under attack also in this particular case from environmental politics, just as in the debate over dietary fat. It was nutritional politics that got in the way of the science.
What are the other areas that the book is delving into? Apart
from those, there are GMOs, genetically modified foods and crops, and I have an introductory chapter on continental drift. That's the theory which gave rise to our present understanding of what's called plate tectonics, that the continents sit on plates that slowly move around.
And so
I think that's actually 5 topics, I think.
So global warming, diet, GMO, continental drift,
evolution.
And evolution.
Yeah, evolution, that's a different debate entirely. In the case of evolution, what got in the way of acceptance of the science there was religion, creationism. People who believe that everything came, as you know, came in a very short time from our Maker. So what it tried to do in the book is to look at these different areas where the attack on science comes from a different direction in general. Sometimes it's politics, sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's religion, and so on, just to get people to think, well, maybe in the case of global warming, maybe the science that is being presented in the form of this narrative isn't real, isn't what it should be either. Maybe it's been distorted.
What has been the feedback on the books? And let's say most recently, the Science Under Attack. What has been the feedback to you about the points you're covering in the book?
To be honest, on the Science Under Attack book, the feedback has been disappointing. And I think I know the reason for that. I think it's simply, as one of my colleagues put it, it's too diverse. It covers too many topics. Yeah. The first book was on just one topic. It was just on global warming, and that sold thousands of copies and got translated into Portuguese. The second book really hasn't gotten off the ground. And as I said, I believe that's the reason. People, they can stretch their minds that far, but they prefer, a book on a single topic.
Right. I think maybe you have some more books in you then to to dive deeper into each one of those topics. And I saw that the global warming false alarm that was published in Portuguese, how'd that come about?
That was that touches on the marketing aspect of your company, actually. That was a self-published book, interestingly enough, whereas my second book's produced by Publishing House. My first book I self-published, and I therefore did all the marketing myself. I couldn't afford to spend thousands of dollars, because I had to spend money to produce the book in the first place. I couldn't afford to spend thousands more on marketing, so I found things to means of promoting it that weren't expensive. And one of those was to exhibit the book at book fairs. There's a big international book fair every year in Frankfurt, Germany. And although I didn't attend the fair myself, I was able to have the book exhibited there. Which basically meant it just sat on a stand somewhere with a little blurb underneath it. A Brazilian publisher, little boutique publisher, happened to be at the fair and saw it and contacted me later and, like you, expressed interest in the book and said they publish somewhat unconventional, or books on unconventional topics. They'd like to translate it into Portuguese. And so they went ahead and did just that. And in fact, were able to sell a couple of thousand copies in Brazil.
Fantastic. Doctor, we're just nearing the end of the podcast. As I had shared with you, 30 minutes goes by very quick. If our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, what's the best way to do that?
Probably my blog, which is at www.scienceunderattack.com/blog, if you like. But I'm also on Twitter, but like much of Twitter, you probably wouldn't learn much by reading my tweets, because debate there often degenerates into a slanging match, as you probably know.
Twitter, for whatever, everybody still loves Twitter, but imagine how quickly it devolves into shouty matches. And we're definitely going to put a link to your blog, Science Under Attack, out on our show notes on our website. We'll also put links to both books, Science Under Attack, The Age of Unreason, and Global Warming False Alarm. We'll put those links out on the show notes as well, so that folks can go back, find the text on Amazon. Just about a minute left. What do you do for fun when you're not writing books and having a point of view that definitely you're swimming against a current, but I appreciate the fact you're on the show. We're having a nice conversation, and we're listening to learn, and so that's what it's all about. What do you do for fun?
Well, one thing I do is cook. I kind of, as a scientist, where everything has to be measured and exact, I kind of like cooking because you can make mistakes and modify things. It's a good way to unwind, I find. And apart from that, I like to travel with my wife.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Alexander, thank you so much for spending time out of your day with us here on the Success Insight podcast. It was enjoyable. Definitely, it's been enjoyable getting to know you, learning more about you and your work. And really, I think for myself, and I'm not going to put words into my listeners' mouth, but if I can learn to understand, perhaps create a new insight, which is why we say Success Insight, I've achieved my goal. New.
Well, thank you, Howard, for the opportunity to chat.
There you have it, folks. We've just chatted with Dr. Ralph B. Alexander, a science writer who puts science above political correctness. Check out his books, Science Under Attack, The Age of Unreason, and Global Warming False Alarm, which are available on Amazon.com. And we'll put the links to that along with the link to his blog, Science Under Attack, on our show notes as well. This podcast is about conversation, learning something new, and I think we've achieved that goal today through this conversation. So I hope you will appreciate it in the same light that I have. For my co-host, Randy Ford, this is Howard Fox. wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there and have a phenomenal day. We'll talk to you soon.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.